Hi, Boise. It's Emma. Do you want to support local farmers while enjoying fresh, pesticide-free food? You've got to check out Global Gardens. They're a nonprofit that supports local farmers from refugee backgrounds in the Treasure Valley. And with their 2023 CSA program, you can eat delicious veggies all season long. You can choose how much you get, and they have convenient pickup locations in Boise and Meridian, plus home delivery. Register now at globalgardensboise.org. Today on CityCast Boise, Lori Vallow has been found guilty on all counts. But what happens now? KTVB's Andrea Dearden is here to tell us how sentencing might go, how the families of JJ and Tylee reacted to the verdict, and what this means for the future trial of Lori's husband, Chad Daybell. It's Monday, May 15th. I'm Emma Arnold, and this is what Boise's talking about. Hi, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to do it.
So the jury in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell just reached their verdict, and what did they decide?
So the jury came back this afternoon just a little bit before 1 o'clock, and they did find Lori Vallow guilty on all charges. So all 6 counts, they returned a verdict of guilty.
And how long did they deliberate, and what does that tell you about the case against Lori Vallow?
Yeah, they did not deliberate very long. So they went into deliberations on Thursday afternoon. Now, when they go into deliberations, there's still quite a lot that has to happen. I mean, they have to select a foreman. That's kind of the person in charge of the deliberations. They have to go through the instructions. They have to know exactly what's expected of them. You know, they always get those instructions about what the charges actually mean, what it means to find someone guilty, what it means not to, to find someone not guilty. So there is some technical details that have to happen. So that started late Thursday afternoon. They then decided they were going to take a break overnight. So, go and sleep. And then they came back into deliberation this morning, so Friday morning. And so that we're talking about a matter of hours that they deliberated. And, relatively quick, especially considering that there were 6 different charges that they have to come to independent analysis of. They have to come to an independent verdict. So while there are 12 people that have to make up their minds, they each have to do that on their own. And that is a very specific instruction. As a juror, you aren't trying to convince the person next to you to see it the way you do. I mean, you are required and asked to independently determine whether that defendant is guilty or not guilty. And so, to have 12 people do that on 6 different charges in a matter of hours, it's relatively quick.
Yeah, it seemed quick. Who was in the courtroom from the family, and how did they react?
We know that the grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, so JJ's grandfather and grandmother, who have been there and really been very vocal throughout this trial, they were there and were, I would call it, jubilant as they left the courtroom. They were emotional, but in a very almost celebratory way. They said that they were very pleased with the outcome. They thanked prosecutors. They thanked law enforcement. Now, I also recognize that celebration turns into tears very quickly because they also are still without their grandson, JJ, Tylee. Larry said, I've never met the late wife of Chad Daybell, and yet she will forever be a part of our lives. So they have connected all 3 of these victims and certainly wanted justice for all 3 of them. And he said today he felt like that happened.
And what about Lori Vallow? How did she react?
There was very little reaction at all from Lori today. She stood stoically, which is not really different than what we have seen of her throughout this trial. She really didn't show any emotion. There was no change in body. That sometimes you'll see a defendant kind of slump over, or you start to see that reaction. Sometimes defense attorneys will somewhat console their client or, help them through listening to the verdict. There was none of that. She stood very, her facial expression didn't really change. She just stood quietly and still. At the very end, as they were allowing the jury to leave, they asked everyone to stand. They're ending the proceedings. And Lori crossed her arms and stood there with her arms crossed. And that was really the only reaction we saw whatsoever.
Wow. Well, the trial itself was about 6 weeks, a little shorter than predicted. Why was it so short?
I think some of it is just scheduling. You never really know when they predict how long a trial will go. They are having to sort of guess how long it's going to take for questioning. Matters about, how much the cross-examination is going to go. And then will redirect take time? I mean, so it really depends on, they're kind of having to guess, I guess, when they schedule a trial. And so, yes, it did go shorter than expected. I don't think that that's indicative of a major change in strategy. I think that they simply planned and wanted to make sure that they were giving jurors and those witnesses a pretty realistic explanation that it could take 8 to 10 weeks. So we need you to be available for that. But the fact that it ended sooner just meant that it went a little bit quicker than they had predicted.
How many witnesses did the state call?
It was right at 60 witnesses. So quite a few. The prosecution is the only side that called any witnesses. The defense, of course, had the opportunity to cross-examine all of those and question all of those witnesses, but they did not present any witnesses on their own.
I was a little confused by that. Why didn't the defense call any witnesses?
The defense, their job is not to prove innocence of their client. It's the prosecution's job to prove guilt, meaning that it is not the defense attorney's job to offer another option. They are only there to make sure that there is reasonable doubt if they can do something to help, ensure that their client, that reasonable doubt kind of creeps into the jurors' minds. So what we saw here was the defense didn't need to present a witness. They don't have to present witnesses. What they said was, we don't believe that the prosecution has done enough to show that our client is guilty. And they let that stand. In their closing arguments, they told the jury she got wrapped up with Chad Daybell and that he was the reason that all of this happened. And that, yes, she was manipulated. And yes, she was in love with this man who led her astray. But that does not equal guilty of murder. The jury disagreed.
Set 5 years after Jedi Fallen Order, follow Cal Kestis in his increasingly desperate fight in the new video game Star Wars Jedi Survivor. No longer a Padawan, Cal has grown into a powerful Jedi Knight. As the memories and expectations of the Jedi Order weigh on him, his crusade against the Empire has only become more perilous. But how far is he willing to go to save those closest to him? Star Wars Jedi Survivor is available on April 28th and is rated T for teen.
This episode is brought to you by the new Disney Plus original series, American Born Chinese. Based on the graphic novel by Jean Luen Yang, American Born Chinese tells the story of an average teenager that becomes entangled in a battle with Chinese mythological gods. This star-studded cast includes Academy Award winners Michelle Yeoh and Ke Huy Quan, plus Daniel Wu, Jim Liu, and Ben Wang. American Born Chinese, premiering May 24, exclusively on Disney Plus.
Was there any evidence that really stuck out to you?
What's super interesting about this case is that there was very, very little direct evidence. We heard of one single hair on a piece of duct tape that was found on J.J. Vallow, who had been bound by duct tape, wrapped in plastic. There was one hair of Lori's on that duct tape. And that was really the only piece of evidence, direct evidence, that tied Lori potentially to this crime. Everything else in this case was circumstantial evidence. Now, powerful circumstantial evidence, but still circumstantial, meaning that the jurors had to infer a lot of meaning behind text messages. Never anywhere did Lori say, "I want my children dead." Never did she say, "I want, you to take my children's life." But in Idaho, all you have to do is believe that the person knew about a crime, had information about a crime, knew that it was going to happen, and did nothing to stop it, meaning that makes them a part of the crime and therefore guilty of the crime. And so all of this circumstantial evidence, there were lots of that. I mean, just from the way that she reacted to people, when her children were missing, the fact that she didn't appear concerned at all, the fact that she was sending text messages about the demons and wondering what percentage of death or life that they were in. I mean, all of that, very odd, none of it directly speaking to murder, but clearly enough in totality for all 12 jurors to say she was guilty. She knew that these children and Tammy Daybell were going to be killed and that she had a part in it.
You mentioned Chad Daybell, and I'm wondering, the outcome of Lori's trial. What does this say about the future trial of Chad Daybell?
You can't help but think that Chad Daybell's attorneys are going to have to take pause now and think about their strategy. The death penalty is still on the table for Chad Daybell. We do know that he has waived his right to a speedy trial. So they have said his trial will not happen until at least June of 24. So we are more than a year out. His attorneys have been present at Lori's trial throughout it. And so I had understood that his attorney said, "Oh, this is good." The jury coming back very quickly. I don't see how today's verdict helps Chad Daybell at all. I mean, the defense definitely pointed to him as being the mastermind, and I don't see how guilty on all counts for Lori doesn't give Chad Daybell's attorneys quite a bit of concern.
Well, what comes next for Lori Vallow now with the sentencing?
They will do what's called a pre-sentencing investigation, which is ultimately a really in-depth report. And they will gather as much information as they possibly can about the charges against her, her history. I mean, they will know everything about her marriages, as much as they can about anything that has led up to this day, from the time that she was born up to this day. And it looks at everything from her mental stability, her risk to the community, her risk to reoffend, kind of where she is in terms of how she's thinking about what happened. Is there any remorse? Is there is there an opportunity, if you will, for any sort of rehabilitation in this woman? And it's really meant to inform the judge about what sentencing should look like for her. Now, on these 6 counts, there will be some minimums. There will be, in statute, there will be minimums where the judge will have no discretion in terms of lowering it beyond a certain amount. So I would expect to see her sentenced to a significant time in prison. But all of that information, all of that investigation has to happen before that. So we're looking at probably another 4 or 5 months before she goes before the judge for sentencing.
Can you remind us, why is the death penalty off the table here?
That was something that they worked out. I mean, that was something that they agreed to. And it was, I think, partially because of the mental health status and kind of talking about all of that. The prosecution agreed to take that off the table around the same time that they agreed to separate the cases of Chad and Lori. And so when you look at a death penalty case, it is a different kind of case. I can only assume that prosecution felt more confident in their ability to get a conviction without the death penalty on the table and with separating these two out. So they were here, all they had to be concerned with was Lori and Lori's perspective and kind of her involvement. They will worry about Chad and Chad's involvement later. Perhaps they agree that he had more of a part in it. Perhaps that's, one of their pieces of, maybe that's part of their thought process, is that he actually is more culpable. And so therefore the death penalty feels more just for him and not for both.
Yeah, you've been following this case and this story for such a long time, and you have so much experience covering other big cases. I'm wondering, how does this trial compare?
I thought that this trial was it was well done. I mean, there was nothing in it that was shocking. I have watched cases where I had a real question about the strategy, where I didn't understand. I almost wondered I remember watching trials where I wondered if a mistrial is what they were going for, just in the way that they were handling some of the questions and the way that the procedures were happening. This one, it was meticulously done. It followed process. The judge was very particular about not allowing any of the fodder from all of the media coverage and all of the conversation outside of the courtroom. Really did a great job of not allowing that in. And so I think it went very well. I mean, I think it was very straightforward. And I think what we expected to get is exactly what we got. There were no major bombshells. There was nothing presented that we thought came out of left field. Nothing that nobody had ever heard before. It was the same things we had always heard, the same information, and ultimately with a little bit more evidence and science backing behind it to show how they knew what happened.
So what stands out to you the most from this whole criminal procedure? Are there things about this case specifically that will really stick with you?
I think less about the trial, more just about the crime in itself. I think that the egregious nature of this, the killing of these two children, the killing of Tammy Daybell, the amount of planning and the amount of work and, organization that went into taking these lives, it seems like so much work and so much effort. And yet at the same time that this is happening, we have these two adults involved that are frolicking on a beach in Hawaii. So just that juxtaposition of, this egregious, heinous crime at the same time that what we see publicly and what we see on the outside is this couple in love and, eager to continue their life together, all under the guise of, religious salvation. I think that to me is what stands out the most. It is just an incredible story. And the amount of death and the amount of, the conniving, the amount of coordination that went into causing so much harm, it is absolutely story making.
And if you want to be kept up to date with Lori Vallow's sentencing or Chad Daybell's trial, you can check out more of KTVB's incredible coverage of this story and others on ktvb.com. That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Leave us a review and subscribe to our Hey Boise newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more local stories from around the city. Bye.